is the shaft sinkhole, hidden amidst the lush green fields of Australia, possessing mesmerizing beauty but full of hidden dangers. It became a tragic deep grave for 4 unfortunate souls on a day in May 1970. Notably, they were all highly experienced diving instructors. So what truly happened down that sinkhole that even the most seasoned individuals could meet with disaster? Desperation Hot TV to find the answer in today. The incident of 8 4 returning in Australia's most beautiful cave. And before we get into the main content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel to follow our next exciting stories. Thank you for all your support. In May 1973, a group of 9 divers planned a risky exploration inside the cave, hoping to set a new record. On the 26th, the group gathered at Mount Gambier, setting up camp at a campsite near the famous Blue Crater Lake. Their goal was to reach the cave entrance of the shaft at a depth of 76 meters, where the last light from the sky could reach. Deeper down, the cave passage would be completely obscured, plunged into pitch-black darkness. At the area called the Abyss, where one cannot see the bottom from above, the cave becomes even more mysterious and frightening. Feel as if you can't see anything below, but you know for sure it extends far down. All 9 members of the diving group were experienced diving guides. However, as this was an extremely dangerous challenge, they planned a trial dive and prepared to install some equipment before the main mission. So what kind of place is the shaft that these experienced divers had to prepare so thoroughly? To better understand this incident, let's learn a bit about where the tragedy occurred. Mount Gambier is the 2nd largest city in South Australia, but in reality, it's only the size of a small town. However, Mount Gambier holds an incredibly important geographical position. It lies right on the border between the states of South Australia and Victoria. Just a few kilometers from the southern coast, it's also the most important settlement in the Limestone Coast region. Not only does it have a prime location, but Mount Gambier is also blessed by nature with unique beauty featuring limestone terrain, blue lakes that look like divine eyes, and a majestic system of caves and sinkholes. Surrounding the city are vast fields stretching all the way to the blue coastline. Prominent among them is a small area of about 2 hectares, nestled between Mount Gambier and the ocean, called Thompson Park Dock. This is land owned by some dairy farmers and also the hiding place of the fateful sinkhole, the shaft. In 1938, a farmer was plowing the field at Thompson Park Dock when suddenly, one of his horses stumbled over something. Feeling strange, the farmer stopped, got down to check, and discovered a hole in the ground. This hole was quite small, only about 30 centimeters, and it seemed he hadn't seen it before. Curious, he knelt down, looked inside, and was truly shocked. The hole was very deep, at least 6 meters, and at the bottom was all water. Isn't that strange? In the middle of an open field, such a deep, bottomless hole suddenly appeared, but the scarier part was yet to come. No one knows for sure how long that farmer had owned the field, why he hadn't noticed the hole before, and whether the horse was the culprit that caused the ground to collapse. Moreover, had that hole been there for a long time, or did it just appear? If the horse caused the hole to open, could it collapse even deeper? And would the surrounding area be affected, at risk of collapsing too? Another concerning thing was that from the outside, the hole's mouth was quite small, only about 60 to 90 centimeters wide, but no one knew what its interior shape was like. It was like an inverted funnel, with a small mouth that widened as it went deeper. Imagine if someone was walking in the field and accidentally stepped into the hole, they would fall freely to a depth of 6 meters and be completely helpless, unable to climb out because the walls were too slippery. All they could do was struggle in the water and call for help in vain. What a terrifying way to go. That deep, bottomless hole made the farmer very worried, and then he came up with an idea. Why not try filling it with rocks? No sooner said than done. He started bringing rocks the size of soccer balls and dropping them into the hole. Thud, thud, each rock fell with a loud sound and then disappeared into the black water, leaving no trace. Dozens, hundreds, even thousands of rocks were dropped, but the hole showed no sign of filling up. It was like a black hole swallowing everything. Bottomless, boundless. In the end, the farmer had to give up helplessly. He could only be cautious around that deadly hole and hope it wouldn't collapse further. The story of the mysterious hole quickly spread, attracting the curiosity of many. Everyone wanted to know the secret hidden deep within a strange hole in the field. Scientists later identified it as a limestone sinkhole. The phenomenon occurs when water erodes the rocks below, gradually forming a cavity right beneath the ground surface. The hole's mouth was initially only about 30 centimeters wide but was expanded to 1 meter for easier exploration. In the early 1960s, the first diver dove into this mysterious cave. After being lowered to a depth of 7 meters, he finally reached the water surface, and what he saw was a small water hole. Right below the entrance, the water hole is quite beautiful, but when he surfaced, the space suddenly expanded to 17 meters. Especially at noon, when sunlight shines directly into the hole's mouth, a magical blue Sophia light suddenly appears, illuminating the cave and the sparkling water below. Private sky. From the water surface, the diver continued exploring the mysterious world below and discovered that the deeper he went, the wider the cave became. On this first exploration, he dove to a depth of about 21 meters before turning back. But the strangest thing was that from his stopping point, he encountered the shadows of an Indian cave that the persistent farmer had thrown down many years ago. They lay silently at the cave bottom like a tiny ant nest in a giant room. This meant the cave was much deeper than people had imagined. The shaft cave was later surveyed and mapped in detail, where all the resting stones and 2 steep branches extended in nearly opposite directions. The main chamber is 140 meters long and 79 meters wide at its broadest point. The top of the rock pile lies about 36 meters below ground, but no one knows for sure where the cave bottom is. From the shaft's main chamber, a tunnel extends northwest, plunging to nearly 80 meters depth, and on the opposite side of this tunnel, another extends up to 124 meters. It's believed these tunnels may connect all the way to the southern coast, as part of a complex freshwater drainage system flowing through the area. Not only that, the mysterious world within the shaft's sinkhole also captivates divers with its enchanting beauty. The rugged cliffs, the protruding rocks in every corridor, all create a magnificent, captivating picture. The crystal clear water and vast space make the shaft a dream paradise for any cave diver. Although the accurate map of the shaft was completed in 1984, a decade earlier, in 1973, over 8,000 dives had already been conducted here. At that time, the true depth of the cave remained an unknown, and people believed it was bottomless. Cave diving activities back then were also quite novel. Due to limited equipment, divers typically only explored to the safe zones marked on the map. They stood at the edge of the dark zone, staring into the black abyss, not knowing where it led. On May 27th, the group of 9 divers we mentioned earlier arrived at Thompson Park Dock Field. Signed the guest book, then drove onto the grass where the shaft's entrance is located. They parked, unloaded gear, and set up a massive pulley system mounted on a tripod, a device commonly used in cave diving operations. This pulley was meant to lower divers into the water. However, the shaft's entrance remained too narrow, even after being widened. So divers couldn't descend into the water simultaneously they could only be lowered one by one. To return to the surface, they would also have to climb up a pre-fixed rope ladder. And eventually, all divers had safely landed on the water surface. They were overwhelmed by the vast space right below the entrance. That day, their main task was to set up a guideline, a rope running from the surface, weighted down, and leading straight to the rock pile at the bottom. This rope would help them navigate more easily on subsequent dives and give them more time to explore the cave. During the test dive, the divers reached a depth of about 61 meters, right at the rock pile and still within the light from the entrance. But from here, they could see the legendary abyss in the distance. The ultimate goal of the journey, the cave bottom widened horizontally then suddenly disappeared. No one knew what lay behind that black curtain. After the successful test dive, the group returned to Mount Campier to recharge the dive light's batteries and refill the air tanks. They would return the next day to conquer the unknown territory. On May 28th, the beautiful sunny weather supported their adventurous mission. At noon, the dive team returned to the shaft's entrance. They donned their bulky dive suits, did a final equipment check, and were lowered into the water one by one. However, one female diver in the group named Joanne decided not to participate in this dive. She would stay on shore, providing support and preparing food for the others. Thus, only 8 divers ventured into the sinkhole, including Robert, John, Peter, Gordon, Larry, and the 3 siblings Glenn, Stephen, and Christine. The group dove to the rock pile at 40 meters depth, then continued towards the tunnel with the abyss. So, would this exploration proceed smoothly? When they reached about 55 meters depth, Robert began to feel signs of nitrogen narcosis, a phenomenon that occurs when nitrogen in a dive gas dissolves into the blood, causing a dizzy, lightheaded sensation, similar to being drunk. Although this happened earlier than expected, it was severe enough for him to know he needed to return to shallower water to recover. Perhaps this is an appropriate time to discuss a reality. At this time, sea diving and cave diving activities were still quite novel. The rules and regulations weren't as clear and strict as they are today. Many people, despite lacking extensive diving experience, still participated in these dangerous activities. Our dive group, although all were professional dive instructors, primarily had experience in open water, where conditions are ideal. Crystal clear and well-lit water, cave diving is an entirely different story. Not to mention, at that time, there were no mandatory requirements for cave diving certifications. Anyone can dive, anywhere, with minimal supervision. But what's even more alarming are the safety regulations. You might be surprised to know that this group of divers planned to dive to a depth of 76 meters, using only regular compressed air tanks. Today, the maximum recommended depth when using compressed air tanks is 40 meters. Beyond this limit, nitrogen narcosis will occur, affecting your judgment and motor skills. More dangerously, at around 56 meters depth, the air becomes toxic and in some cases can cause seizures. If you have a seizure at that depth, the breathing apparatus will fall out and you will drown. But our 8 divers dove to a depth of 55 meters and they were only equipped with regular compressed air tanks. When Robert signaled to the others that he would return, they also signaled that they would continue on. He returned to the rock pile, swam around, checked the area and looked for animal skeletons that might have sunk to the bottom. About 8 minutes later, in the dark blue water, Robert briefly saw Glenn's flashlight beam approaching him. Both were almost out of air and Glenn, who was always careful to monitor the gauge, had also realized this. They met up and surfaced together. Larry also surfaced at the same time as them. And 30 seconds later, Peter emerged in a state of depleted air. I can't see the others. Peter kept stammering, his voice trembling from exhaustion. A chilling sensation ran down the spines of those who had just returned from near death. Glenn, in his panic, suddenly realized a terrifying truth. His brother and sister were still down there and they were also running out of air. A few minutes earlier, Glenn's group had continued deeper into the cave after Robert turned back. They swam, taking photos and admiring the mysterious beauty of the hidden world, until they reached a depth of 61 meters. Glenn and the others were swimming along a rock ledge at the bottom and he saw his sister Christine just a few meters away. Everything was still normal. He moved above and looked down into the dark blue water. 5 minutes had passed since they started diving, but now, Glenn felt slightly dizzy. Nitrogen narcosis had begun to visit. He checked the gauge, discovered his air supply was running low, and he also realized that the others were also nearly out of air. Glenn decided to turn back, but before that, he wanted to signal to his sister Christine so she would return with him. Glenn reached out, intending to tap his sister's shoulder, but Chris suddenly swam away, out of his reach, not wanting to waste any more time there. Glenn believed the others would soon follow him, so he surfaced first. Glenn met Robert and both returned to the surface together. In a moment, Glenn decided to go back down. things began to turn worse inside the shaft cave. A series of unfortunate events occurred, turning the exploration into the most catastrophic cave diving accident in history. Peter, like Glenn, began to feel dizzy from nitrogen narcosis. He wanted to check Glenn's depth gauge, so he swam closer to him. But Glenn had surfaced before Peter could see him. Peter paused for a moment, observed the dark blue water around him, and noticed two other divers also swimming toward the exit. Then he glanced at his own gauge. His air supply was also running out. Peter turned around and swam toward what he thought was the exit. But strangely, the rock wall in front of him suddenly became engulfed in shadow. He couldn't recognize the way. It turned out that after the group entered the cave, dark clouds had moved in, obscuring the sky and most of the light from the entrance. The shaft cave suddenly became dark and the divers were scattered everywhere. 3 divers, Christine, Gordon, and Larry, were trapped near the deepest area they had explored. Larry and Gordon, after checking their gauges, also discovered that their air supply was at an alarming level. They panicked and signaled to Christine, then began swimming upward. But instead of swimming diagonally, they swam straight up. A wrong decision. In limestone caves like the shaft, sometimes falling rock debris creates dome-shaped hollows in the cave ceiling. It's believed that exhaust bubbles from divers had accumulated in some of these hollows and created a mirror-like effect on the cave ceiling, similar to the effect near the entrance. Larry and Gordon, in a dazed state from oxygen deprivation and faint light, were deceived by the false light reflection. They thought they were swimming in the right direction, and so they swam straight up, crashing into the cave ceiling. In the pitch-black water, Gordon and Christine panicked, waving their flashlights around, searching for the exit. But Larry's flashlight suddenly went out. In a few terrifying seconds, he became completely lost in the darkness, then suddenly the light came back on. Perhaps because he had drifted lower and perhaps out of luck, his viewing angle now allowed him to see another diver in the distance and then the entrance. Larry hurriedly rushed toward the light and surfaced just as Glenn and Robert had also returned. Peter, after struggling in the dark labyrinth, also found the exit, but his brief joy was quickly replaced by extreme horror. There were still 4 more people missing, including Glenn's brother and sister. Without hesitation, Glenn immediately grabbed the spare air tank and dove down. Trying to find them, he rushed recklessly into the depths hoping for a miracle to happen. When he reached the edge of the cliff at a depth of over 9 meters, he discovered his brother's flashlight and camera lying scattered on the bottom. The murky water around was obscured by mud. Visibility was almost zero. But with a desire to find his brother and sister, Glenn decided to cross the cliff wall, gradually entering the terrifying mud curtain. As soon as he entered that mud curtain, Glenn was enveloped by a thick darkness. He couldn't even see his own hand. Fear had begun to reach its peak. Glenn panicked and swam back to the edge of the cliff wall, staring into the abyss, hoping to see the figures of his brother and sister. But hopeless, he was finally forced to return to the water surface. Peter also dove down following Glenn, but he found nothing as well. At this time on shore, an ambulance had arrived. Everyone understood that hope had vanished, no one had survived. The police also soon arrived at the scene and they began planning to search for the victims' bodies the next day. The next day, divers dispatched by the police went to the shaft. They dove through a depth of 61 meters, but the mud was still dense, obscuring visibility. They had reached their limit and were returning empty-handed, having found no victims. After the second search also yielded no results, the police decided to suspend the operation until they received support from the Navy. The depth of the shaft was a major challenge, exceeding the training capabilities of the police team. They needed time and more professional support. Until January of the following year, when the victims were still missing, the landowner allowed a film crew making a documentary about cave diving into the shaft to film. They wanted to include footage of the shaft in the documentary alongside some other locations in the area. On January 22nd, they dove through a depth of about 15 meters. The professional lighting system turned the dark cave as bright as day. While preparing to film, the technician suddenly saw a very strange human figure behind his 2 colleagues. They panicked, swam over to check and discovered it was a person in diving gear. They immediately stopped filming, surfaced, and made a phone call. The next day, police returned to the shaft and found the body of one victim trapped under a narrow rock ledge at a depth of 15 meters. They continued diving to a depth of 55 meters but found no one else. The victim was identified as Stephen, aged 103. In March 1974, after nearly a year, 3 victims from the horrific diving accident were still missing. The worried and uneasy landowner decided to seek help from a more professional diving team with more modern equipment. On March 9, this diving team entered the water and began the search. They found one body lying face up at a depth of 5 to 6 meters, with a second body right below it. And finally, going another 6 meters deeper, they found the final victim, John. John was trapped under a narrow rock ledge, making body recovery very difficult and taking up to a month. Nearly a year earlier, on that fateful day, it's believed that Christine and Gordon ran out of air while in the donut-shaped air pocket on the cave ceiling. Arms, realizing they had no chance of survival. And that. No one knows for sure who saw John, but one of the survivors recounted that he saw another diver swimming deeper while the others were turning back. That might have been John, who was found at the deepest position. Believed he was severely affected by many air. As for Stephen, no one knows what happened in his final moments. His body was found in a higher position compared to the others along the cave ceiling. Instead of at the bottom, when found, his buoyancy control device was inflated, causing him to float up and become trapped on the cave ceiling. Possibly in the murky water, Stephen tried to find his way out by floating up to the cave ceiling and crawling along it. Then he ran out of air before he could escape. Whatever the case, the truth about what happened to Stephen forever sank into the depths of this dark sinkhole. The accident at the shaft was the most horrific tragedy in cave diving history. It was like the final straw that pushed for the establishment of the Cave Divers Association of Australia, CDAA, with the goal of professionally managing cave diving activities and preventing similar tragedies from occurring. Looking back, we can know that those divers were wrong to venture into the mysterious world within the shaft without knowledge, skills, and thorough preparation. It's easy for many to criticize their use of compressed air tanks instead of specialized gas mixtures. But remember, at that time diving equipment was still quite limited and gas mixtures weren't widely used. They should also have used guidelines to ensure safety, avoiding getting lost when the cave passage was obscured by mud or in darkness. In fact, they knew this but decided not to use them because their group was too large. They feared the lines would become tangled, making the situation even more dangerous. But actually handling this situation is quite simple. For such a risky expedition, they should have split into smaller groups to facilitate the use of guidelines. Fortunately, after the establishment of CDAA and similar organizations, the mortality rate from cave diving has significantly decreased. The story of the shaft and the unfortunate diving team serves as a costly warning for all of us. Never be complacent or underestimate the dangers, whether you are on the ground, at the bottom of the ocean, or deep within the earth. And you, what do you think about today's story? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments section. Before we end, thank you for watching our video on the Kanha TV channel. Don't forget to leave a like, share, and subscribe to the channel to support and look forward to more exciting stories. And now, we'll see you again at the same time tomorrow.
If the veil stirred, subscribe and meet the next encounter.